Happy Monday, good people, everyone out there in YouTube land. This is episode 48 of Stir Crazy, where we bring you the news unvarnished, unfiltered, unscripted, all of that. All right. Today's episode, the revolution will be televised and it will be streamed and it will be live broadcast and it will be tweeted and it will be shared, and everything that is coming in, not just from across the country, but from around the world, continues to make waves, societal waves, policy waves, structural waves, and fingers crossed, we're going to keep this thing moving. Okay. Now, listen, coming up, we're going to examine some of the instances of police brutality. I know we did that a little bit on Friday, showed y'all some videos that were probably very difficult to watch, but just so you know, the protests very much were in full swing, all 50 states across the country this weekend, and police were beating people in some instances. We still have some issues, some instances of police brutality. Philadelphia comes to mind. We saw some instances of vandalism amongst Minneapolis Police, LAPD not taking too kindly to the proposal from Los Angeles Mayor Garcetti to cut their funding by over $100 million. Their police union says, oh, is that what you think? Is that what you thought? We're going to do something a little different. So yeah, there's a whole lot going on, a whole lot to get to. We know you all love to mix it up in the chat and in the comments, so you guys can keep that moving. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to email us as well, stircrazy@therealnews.com. All right, gang. Well, let's bring in our all-star Real News panel today. Joining us, I think everyone is in the Maryland area, perhaps. Our visuals and research producer, Andrew Corkery, is here. We're also joined with executive producer, Don Rojas, and our booking producer and co-host of the forthcoming show, Why You Should Give a Fuck, Genevieve Montinar. Panel, thank y'all so much for being here today on Monday.
Thank you. Happy Monday.
Yes, indeed. Beginning of another day and the revolution.
That's right. That's right. And the revolution, it is being televised. Now, we suggest you watch your revolution televised right here on The Real News and other places from around the web. But we're going to start really with the positive news coming out of this weekend. The announcement from the Minneapolis City Council that they do intend to dismantle their police department. It is not going to be an overnight process, but the Appeal is reporting that there is a veto-proof majority on this front when it comes to dismantling the police via the city council. This comes after a number of Minneapolis institutions have severed their relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department, including the Minneapolis Public Schools and the University of Minnesota. Also, Minneapolis Parks and Recs said that they don't want cops at they parks bothering people. I am all with that. So panel, well, hold on. Before we get to the panel, wait a minute, because I feel like we got to toss in this video of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. So despite what the Minneapolis City Council has voted, the mayor was in attendance this weekend at one of the massive protests being held in his city. And the video's like 2 minutes and some change, gang, but it's worth it. So this is the vantage point of someone in the crowd recording the mayor addressing the crowd and a local activist interviewing him in front of this massive crowd. You don't want to turn away from this. Take a look.
The department operates. A systemically racist system needs to be revamped. The police union needs to be put in its place. We need to make sure that everything from the union contract to the way that the arbitration functions to the way that the officers and the culture of the department behaves.
Jacob Frey, we have a yes or no question for you.
Yes or no? Yes or no?
Jacob Frey, we have a yes or no question for you. Yes or no, will you commit to defunding Minneapolis Police Department? What did I say? We don't want no more police. It's that clear. We don't want people with guns toting around in our community, shooting us down. You have a yes or no. Will you defund the Minneapolis Police Be quiet, y'all. Be quiet, because it's important that we actually hear this. It's important that we hear this, because if y'all don't know, he's up for re-election next year. If y'all don't know, he's up for re-election next year. And if he says no, guess what the fuck we gonna do next year?
You're doing that regardless.
Get the fuck out of here! Go! Go on, Jacob! Go home! Go home, 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 Jacob! Go home!
Shame. Oh my gosh. I love that. That was so entertaining. Turn that up. Hold on, Dwayne. We got to get that from another vantage point. Take a look at this walk of shame. This was better than Cersei having to walk through King's Landing to the Red Keep. Let's go. So that was nice. So we just saw the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, be shouted down after refusing to say that he would defund the police, a demand made by many organizers there in Minneapolis. Okay, here we go. Panel. What is your take to what you just saw and your response to what the decision is based off this weekend's vote by the Minneapolis City Council? Don Rojas, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. Good to be back with you, Kim. Well, you know, I'm sorry for that poor young mayor who thinks that he is very progressive. But you know, the people there in Minneapolis have made their voices loud and clear. I mean, they have expressed their sentiments in no uncertain terms. They do not want a piddling little reform here, reform there. But as their city council voted unanimously to disband and restructure from the ground up the Minneapolis Police Department, I think what the city council did, I got to give it kudos for that, could in fact become a model for how community-based policing, community oversighted policing can work in a big city in the United States. It could very well be a model that can be replicated in other big cities. So it's something that we should be looking at very carefully how this plays out in the weeks and months ahead. Of course, as you said, Kim, I think you mentioned the LA Police Union saying in no uncertain terms that they are not going to accept Mayor Garcetti's plan to defund the police department by $150 million and or to divest the city's money, $150 million of Los Angeles taxpayers' money, from a system of punishment and invest it in a system of community development. So, and I think that the mayor of New York City, Mayor de Blasio, made a similar statement last evening. I have not yet heard the response from the New York Police Union, which is a very, very powerful organization, and New York having the largest police force in the country with some 33 or 35,000 members. So yeah, we are in a very interesting moment in the history of policing in the United States.
Genevieve, so we have a comment here from the comments. What's up, little guillotine? I see you out there. Now, they say that they are extremely skeptical of the Minneapolis City Council's promise to, quote, disband Minneapolis Police Department. They have zero plan on how to do it and promise not to do or move it on for at least a year. He said, or they said, I smell movement pacifying lip service. Is your take that what we've been seeing out of Minneapolis, the response from some of the elected officials there, is this lip service, or you think that this has a real chance of taking hold, disbanding the police department?
I mean, I think it's half and half, but like, as you can see in that video, like they literally gave him the right answer and he still answered wrong. The people are going to hold their elected officials accountable. They're done playing these political games. They're done waiting for a change to happen. They're going to hold their political officials accountable. If they don't do what they said they're going to do, I have a feeling that they're not going to be in office for very long. They're going to be voted out, just like the woman said about the mayor.
Yeah, and in Minneapolis, they don't have a problem of turning over their mayorships, nor does the city of Baltimore. That's the story for another day, though. Andrew Corkery, we have seen a city police department disbanded and sort of remade in a different way. That of Camden, New Jersey. We know Camden used to be extra wild back in the day, but Camden did something different. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so just for some context, anecdotally, like I grew up in New Jersey, about 20 minutes or so away from Camden, New Jersey, and heard stories of crime and all these different issues that have plagued the city of Camden for generations throughout my childhood and throughout my upbringing. But just to bring this into the context of what we're dealing with now, Camden, New Jersey is that one of the examples that Don, you were kind of alluding to there, and that Minneapolis could be an example. But Camden, New Jersey actually disbanded and restructured its police department in 2013. And there's been a number of different reports, both in newspapers and also like Bloomberg and City Lab and other outlets, as well as independent investigatory studies that have shown that, to a large extent, it was a success. And in 2017, the city, once considered one of the most dangerous in the United States, saw its murder rate fall to the lowest level since 1987, in addition to a dramatic decline in other crimes. And Camden, New Jersey is, implementing a lot of these community-based policing techniques. Officers are specifically trained to use handguns and handcuffs only as tools of last resort, and many wear both the GPS tracker constantly and body cameras on as well. So, I mean, this still leaves a lot to be desired for the police abolition movement, and there's some definite legitimate critiques to be made about, the level of progress that's been seen in Camden since the disbanding. But unquestionably, it's been a tangible, good success in a lot of different ways as it relates to the decrease in targeting of communities of color, an increase in the community oversight over the police, and just tangibly the crime rate, and also the police-involved incidents, or what people continuously refer to as police-involved incidents, which is just police did something wrong. I mean, the media should really kind of get a understanding of how to characterize that, but that's kind of another issue there. But yeah, so Camden is a tangible case of what can happen when we go down the road towards disbanding militant, human rights violating police departments that are habitual and uncompromising in any way, shape, or form. So I encourage people to look into more information about Camden, and hopefully something good can come of what's going to happen in Minneapolis. But I do think that it's largely up to the people, and those people that you saw at the protest taking their mayor to task, and whether or not this becomes another issue where people can foment a political image of being a progressive and say that they want to do this, but then actually enact a tangible policy that doesn't deal with any of the solutions that the people are demanding in the first place.
Kim, can I ask Andrew a quick question?
Sure.
Andrew, what percentage of the Camden police force are people of color?
Yeah, I mean,
the city itself is a majority minority city, correct?
Yeah,
and I think it's one of the poorest cities in the state of New Jersey.
For sure.
Yeah, has the racial composition of the police force made a big difference there?
I mean, they've definitely expanded the opportunities for minority communities and people of the community to be involved. I do believe that it's something that needs to be pushed further and needs to be more well integrated. I mean, the people who run Camden City Police at the top are majority still, white and and or are subservient to, interests that are white interests. For example, one of the reasons why they're doing what they're doing in Camden is because they have an idea that, it could be potentially, gentrified, considering that Philadelphia is becoming gentrified in a lot of different ways. And, the next step to, gentrifying Philadelphia would be gentrifying the surrounding areas like Camden. So that's something that the left also needs to push back on, along with having more integration into the power structure of the Camden Police Department and city government more generally.
Okay.
And the point that I wanted to raise that is reported in this article on the appeal.org is that talking about Minneapolis specifically, but if you sort of stretch this out, you would probably find this is the case in a lot of big cities with police agencies using hundreds of millions of dollars in the city budget for their budget. The appeal reports, it says, for years, activists have argued that the MPD has actually failed to keep the city safe. For example, MPD's record for solving serious crimes is consistently low. In 2019, Minneapolis police only cleared 56% of cases in which a person was killed. For rapes, the police rape clearance rate was just 22%. In other words, 4 out of every 5 rapes go unsolved in Minneapolis. Further casting doubt on the department's commitment to solving sexual assault, MPD announced last year the discovery of 1,700 untested rape kits spanning 30 years, which officials said had been misplaced. So I think a lot of people are wondering, well, geez, if we're spending $200 million, $300, $400, $500 million a year on police, and they're not solving a majority of the violent cases, which is a lot of the argument against disbanding police is who will solve murders and rapes? Who the fuck is solving them now? Apparently not the cops. And in the comments, one of our viewers raises an interesting point. Ron Wagner says, aren't you afraid if a city's police department is disbanded or defunded, it will lead to the privatization of a city's police? Genevieve, let me kick that to you, because I mean, I think that's a very valid point. I mean, the police at least are pretending to serve the public and pretend to have some sort of accountability over them. I mean, it's not even nor consistent enough. But my gosh, I think about people who are police adjacent or people who think of themselves as police being armed and then tasking themselves to be these vigilante crime solvers. Yep, that sounds as scary as regular police, if not more scary. What's your opinion, Genevieve?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the privatization issue is obviously not the best result coming out of this. But I think if you're fearful of defunding the police, then you're going to just continue on the same road that we have been going on. And clearly that's not working. So money talks. So, if you continue to fund these people who are not doing what they said they were going to do, then why would you expect any different type of change? Obviously, the way to get at the problem is to attack the money angle. And I think that's a viable one.
Right. I want us to take a video of a video that Mother Jones reported on, where police in Minneapolis were shown slashing tires of cars. Can we have a look at that?
Oh, wow.
I just got back to my vehicle, parked in a lot, and the police slashed one 2, 3, 4 of my tires. And they've also slashed every other car that's parked in this lot's tires. Every car that's parked here has their tires slashed. Every single car. Unbelievable. I can't get home now.
Guy, what the fuck? They literally just slashed somebody.
My live stream tuned out. Oh, there it goes. They're slicing those guys' tires.
They literally just sliced somebody.
Well, wasn't that nice? Now, according to the Minneapolis Star Tribune, this is identified on motherjones.com, the Star Tribune has identified the officers puncturing tires as state troopers and deputies from the Anoka County Sheriff's Office. The officers strategically deflated the tires to, quote, stop behaviors such as vehicles driving dangerously and at high speeds and in and around protesters and law enforcement, said the Minneapolis Department of Public Safety spokesperson Bruce Gordon. The troopers reportedly targeted cars that, quote, contained items used to cause harm during violent protests, such as rocks and concrete. The Anoka County Sheriff's Office Lieutenant Andy Knoltz said deputies were following directions from state-led multi-agency command centers. So they were vandalizing people's property by command. Isn't that reassuring? Aren't you all reassured by that information?
Do we need more evidence that police need systemic reform and not just reform, but just complete overhaul after watching that video? I mean,
absolutely. Kim, I just wanted to. You talked earlier about the city of Los Angeles and the police union there, and just for perspective and for context. The LAPD's operating budget is $1.8 billion, billion with a B, per year. What the mayor is proposing is taking $150 million out of a $1.8 billion operating budget and redirecting those funds to community development. So let's keep that in perspective as we continue this discussion.
Pennies, crumbs.
Exactly,
oh my gosh, they are so upset that a crumb is being taken from their giant loaf of taxpayer-funded budget. Well, speaking of the LAPD, Don, they're pissed, as you can imagine, at that announcement by Mayor Garcetti, again, which is such a small amount relative to their whole budget, but they don't want to lose any dollars at all. And this is an interesting report from ABC7, which I think is going to perhaps show a line of demarcation between politicians who are now at least talking tougher on police, whether or not their actual stands and policies hold up to scrutiny. We haven't yet, discovered, but they don't even like the talk, and they don't even like to be threatened with being having crumbs taken away from them. So let's check out this report from ABC7, which is talking about how the LA police union is possibly fighting back against threats on their budget. Let's have a look.
The police union blasts his leadership and questions his mental competence.
Now, again, with the current riot situation in Los Angeles, we are honestly concerned about mental health, and I think that he should seek some help.
The union, agitated by a statement from the mayor to black leaders talking about change.
It starts someplace, and we say we are going to be who we want to be, or we're going to continue being the killers that we are.
He called us killers, not only us, but also the rest of the law enforcement community throughout the nation.
It is the union up in arms now, denouncing the mayor's plan to cut as much as $150 million from the police budget and direct $250 million to community development.
It's going to cause delayed response time to 911 calls. It's going to cause crime to go out of control.
Union leader Joretta Sandoz accused city leaders of pandering to protesters at this meeting with council member Monica Rodriguez.
You bow down to Black Lives Matter. These police officers that are out here protecting the city, that protected it from being on fire, if it wasn't for them, this city would be burnt down right now. And I wasn't there about it.
The union defends officers who appear to be engaging in excessive force on social media, but say that these clips don't explain how officers are often acting in self-defense.
So for the city leaders now to turn their back on the officers who kept the city as safe as they could, it's just disgusting.
Well, officers, if the social media clips aren't exactly depicting what you say is happening, why don't you turn on your body cameras? Isn't that what they're for? You're supposed to cut on the body cameras. I know you're used to turning them off so people don't see all the fuck shit that you do. But maybe if you think the story is not being reported accurately, you can always be citizen journalist yourself and turn on the body cameras and show us what's really going on. Or we're going to take the word of the people that are out there in the street. Dwayne, I want to pop up that Facebook post from the Broward County, Florida, Sheriff's Department, which were in reference to the incident that we all saw happen late last week with the 75-year-old elderly protester in Buffalo, New York, being knocked to the ground by police. 2 police officers have been since charged with assault of that gentleman, and allegedly 57 of those police officers resigned from their position on the emergency response team. They did not resign from the force, as was erroneously reported in some places. But on Facebook, the Brevard County Fraternal Order of Police says, hey, Buffalo 57 and Atlanta 6, referring to the 6 officers in Atlanta who were fired for using brutalization tactics against a Spelman and a Morehouse student. We are hiring in Florida, lower taxes, no spineless leadership or dumb mayors rambling at press conferences. Move to where you are loved. Ooh, that's scary. So if you live in Brevard County, Florida, watch out, because you got a bunch of rogue officers about to come your way looking for jobs because they've been invited by the FOP. Gang, I wanted to get your take on what the response is going to be nationwide from a lot of these big, powerful, influential police unions. We know the union of Baltimore is extremely influential. They gave a sizable amount of money to multiple mayoral candidates this election cycle. And the same could be said in Philly and New York and Chicago and St. Louis and LA and Oakland and San Francisco and Dallas and Houston and Miami and all these different places. I fear when the empire strikes back, it's not going to be pretty. Andrew Corkery, what's your take about how police are going to respond to now being held to account in a variety of ways?
Yeah, so I guess it seems to be that police unions have become unfettered super PACs for police brutality and the destruction of civilization. So with that in mind, I think that this is an organized bulwark against systemic change in our society. And so whenever you get a situation where thousands upon thousands of people, millions upon people, every single year are brutalized at the hands of a police infrastructure that is categorically designed to suppress minority communities and people of color and poor white people as well. You're going to get pushback because this is an industry to them. This is their livelihoods. This is the money that they make for their livings, is brutalizing people in the streets every single day with absolutely and or at minimum a little bit of accountability. So the police unions are basically a infrastructure in order to have a top-down approach on government in which systemic change and progressive causes for dealing with police are stymied and or destroyed. We have to look at this in the same way that we look at the Koch brothers or any other industry that's a super PAC. These are people that do not have the interests of the general population at heart. They have the interests of a minority, oppressive group in the police brigades that run around the United States, claiming that they're doing nothing wrong. And just to say one quick thing about the ABC News report, the reporter in that report says that they appear to be exercising, brutal tactics, or they appear to. It's like, the lengths that reporters need to now go to commit themselves ideologically to this false sense of equivalence is just ridiculous. If you look at the video, you can see them brutally beating the hell out of someone for no apparent reason. So, I mean, you know, we need to take that in mind too when we talk about dealing with the union infrastructure, and we talk about dealing with the political, you know, juggernaut and super PAC really that is police unions in America. We have to deconstruct how the media frames their use of their power in society. And we have to hold the media accountable when they inarticulately talk about, you know, police unions in such an uncritical manner, because that affects the broader society and how people understand police unions and what they do. You know, for example, when I was in Philadelphia, I did a story about the PAL program, which did a lot of good stuff for low-income minority communities in the city. But the problem is that it was such a small part of the police budget, and it received such a large amount of the media attention that it needed to be deconstructed. And so one time I wrote, you know, in the article about the PAL program, a line about how they were using the PAL program as a propaganda tool to suppress the actual lived reality of people of color in the city of Philadelphia. And, you know, I didn't get any emails from the PAL program after that because I wasn't buying into their propaganda. So, you know, that's just an example of how that is played out in terms of the political power in America.
PAL program, you mean the Police Athletic League? Is that what PAL means?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just
yeah.
That's
right,
Police Athletic League. Yeah,
they
exactly.
they have those in many other cities, large cities around the country. And you're right. It is such a small, piddling little program for inner city kids that really does not amount to anything of substance. I'm a little bit familiar with how the PAL program has worked in New York when I was working as a journalist there, and you're right. You know, it's lauded. It gets uncritical praise from the media. It's lionized by the media. But really, the impact is minimal.
I'd like to hear from those in the comments right now. Tell me where you are and what is the media's relationship with the police? Because I can tell you in Baltimore, it is a very fawning relationship. And I'm talking about local media, specifically like the local network affiliates. Seldom do they are they critical of Baltimore Police Department. They always spin it in a way that presents police in the best light. You know, I live closer to Washington, D.C. They're not the greatest at it either. And from the comments, Genevieve, Debbie J says, the sad thing is that a majority of these cities have Black mayors. So I fault them for not holding these police departments accountable. I think that's fair and unfair because, for one, the issue of police brutality goes back way before Black mayors were getting elected, right? Because let's not act like that was always a thing. It was not. But as Black political power and the Black political class has risen over the past 2 to 3 generations, I don't see a lot of Black Democratic mayors trying to hold cops accountable, especially even in this time. Genevieve, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're seeing, what this issue is highlighting right now is that a lot of, I guess, Black politicians in power have been also trying to get their power and hold like the middle America white voters. But now they're being called out, like brazenly called out, and they're being pushed to make more, obvious change. I kind of think of like Mayor Muriel Bowser in DC. So I think you're going to start to see a shift where their like Black politicians are going to will start to be held more accountable by the people, because they're looked at as like leaders within their own communities. So it's kind of like, what are you doing for your community as a politician, as a person with power within your state or within your city? Because there's a disconnect right now, and people will see through that.
I do hope that is the case. Well, and beyond what the police were doing over the weekend, let's talk about the people. Can we give it up to the people? The people took to the streets for 10, 12, 13 consecutive days now. Some of the biggest protests that we have seen since the protests began happened over the weekend in a variety of places. Thousands of people shut down the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Here in Washington, D.C., there were several thousands of people in the streets, quite obviously very peaceful. The the main people causing the problems are the cops and the disruptors, but those are few now at this point. They have at least dwindled. The armed military forces have been pulled out of Washington, D.C., thank God. And let's take a look at some of that drone footage, if we could, Dwayne, over the Los Angeles Black Lives Matter protest on Hollywood Boulevard. I thought that was a nice sight to see. And it's been a multicultural thing, right? People have come out in the thousands. White people have come out in the thousands. White people, we are glad to see y'all out there. Thank y'all for coming. We've been missing you. Come on through. More of you. Get your grandma out there. We want to see everybody out in the streets and advocating for this change in policy, really for a change in how our society operates. Because, I was thinking about how, when you talk to people about police abolition, and again, I am not the police abolitionist expert. We will have those people on here who can explain all of that to you. I'm not going to even sit here and pretend to explain it to you. I just know I agree with it because I myself have had so many negative encounters with the police, and I don't see the police generally as a positive force, or at minimum, not a good way to spend money. We can spend money in different directions, maybe make the police way, way smaller and take their guns away, how they do out in London, but then they have an issue with police brutality out there as well. But speaking of London, if we could take a look at this footage that we saw, and I'm sure a lot of you saw, of Black Lives Matter protests happening in the UK, in particular in Bristol, England, where there was a statue of a longtime slave trader, and they yoked that Bama up and threw him in the river. Show that, Dwayne. And we're going to run that twice because that was glorious. Turn that up. And there's another one, Dwayne, I think it's a video of when they pulled the yes, oh, okay, no, this is actually in Brussels. Okay, here we go. This is in Belgium, where the statue of King Leopold II, the notorious genocider of people in the Congo and other places in Africa, they got on top of his statue trying to tear it down. We saw Confederate statues come down in Richmond, Virginia. Panel, I wanted to ask you, do these symbolic gestures of ripping down these icons of racism and white supremacy, do they beget structural societal change, or is this a performative exercise, in your opinion, or does it really mean something? Don Rojas.
Yeah, I think it does. Just it changes the iconography of a particular place. For example, Bristol. You showed that clip in Bristol in England. Bristol was one of the main ports from where the slave ships, the British slave ships, left on the transatlantic slave route. So Bristol has had a long history of involvement in the African slave trade. I have also seen monuments torn up in other European countries and also in Africa itself, particularly in Francophone Africa, in West Africa. It's an important symbolism, I think, but it doesn't. It's not a substitute for deeper change, more systemic change, structural change, which is, you could have protests against systemic racism, but, symbolisms will not uproot systemic racism, only systemic transformation of the institutions that have been infested with white supremacy for hundreds of years. That's the only ultimate solution. And I know that's a big subject for another discussion, but But to answer your question directly, Kim, I think they are symbolically they do have some value, but they're not to be confused with an ongoing, well organized systemic structural movement.
I think it shows that many people are ready for, the systemic policy level change that we're all talking about here. And I think it shows that a large contingent of the population is ready for that. So I think that in terms of the symbolism, it makes sense, and it is important as an image to show in the trajectory of the movement that's taking hold around the world. But at the same time, I think that the ground needs to be laid for, tangible activism and organizing at a grassroots level to change policy and to change institutional structures in society. But without the imagery and without the unseating of what that statue is, which is the codification of people, lionizing and having glory associated with people who sustainably over a number of years have contributed to, slavery, racism, and institutional problems within our society throughout decades. So, I mean, I think that it's part of a larger picture, but it's a needed image. Just speaking of as myself as a visual producer, it's a needed image in order to kind of galvanize people into believing that we can see a future of systemic change in the future where, we do tackle some of these actual policy issues.
Mm. Genevieve, France has decided to take the policy step in banning police chokeholds for people that are in police custody. This is all in response to the George Floyd protests. Now, we know France is, I'm sure, a nice place, but at the same time, if you're African or North African or, Middle Eastern, it may not be all the friendliest of spots. As we know, as, people who travel abroad, we understand that racism does travel also. But, what is your take on what we've been seeing happening globally? I feel like the U.S. Black Americans have taken really the lead on this, as we have in the past, with the civil rights movement, and many people who immigrate from other places, especially people who come from Africa, the Middle East, are benefiting from the groundwork laid down by Black Americans in the civil rights movement. Is this the new civil rights movement from what you can tell? What do you think?
Well, it's still early, but I think this is showing a big sense of unity internationally because, like you said, like issues of racism, especially racism against Black individuals, that's a global issue. That's not unique to the United States. So it's been kind of amazing to see people from all countries, Palestine, France, even Haiti, all these countries coming together and calling out systemic racism and being like, look, you need to, fix the situation, and there's racism happening here, and we're not going to take it. And the fact that it's inspiring change to other countries, I think is at the end of the day what protesters want, what people who are calling for revolutions want, to see not only change within their communities, but across borders, globally and internationally. So this is almost been like a very inspiring movement to just see that it's spread worldwide, because police brutality is not unique to America. Racism is not unique to America, and people are really starting to wake up. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was so encouraging to see it in places like Seoul, South Korea, right? People out there saying Black Lives Matter, and understanding, I mean, the plight of oppressed peoples on this continent is a story that is well known globally. So, people know what's up, and they understand that it's wrong, but at the same time, they experience American oppression too in their own countries. I would be so pissed. Like, I thought I left America. Why are y'all still oppressing me here with your military and in your corporatization and negative environmental policies and negative labor policies that impact workers and in habitats far from America. So, this is really just the first step, because we have to address that as well. How the U.S. is still has military bases in dozens of countries across this globe. I mean, all of that has to stop. And it begins with this effort against police. And speaking of police, we're going to take it to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because the protests in Philly really have been crazy, with police really, really cracking down hard. Let's take a look at some of the footage of some of the massive protests that happened not only over this past week, but over the weekend.
Police brutality. Yeah. No justice. No peace. No justice.
Now I'm trying to. Where was that at? Was that looked like? Is that the art museum? Andrew
That's
Corkery?
the art museum. That's the art museum right there.
Then
I saw the Eagles.
Parkway.
I saw the Eagles parade there too. I like the sight of seeing what I just saw more than that, though. I can tell you that.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of what Philly police have done. And again, we know that this is not just Philly, just Baltimore, just Minneapolis, just it's everywhere. These police have been wilding out, but we shot in the spotlight on certain places just so you know how it's been going down. So, Andrew, we know that there was a case with a cop allegedly attacking a student from Temple University, but now there has been some developments in that particular case. What happened?
Yeah, so it's really been a crazy time in Philadelphia with all the protests going on. But with this case, so the Philadelphia police staff inspector has been charged with aggravated assault after he attacked a Temple student with a metal baton during a protest last week, and he turned himself in early this morning. His name is Joseph Milano, and he's a 31-year-old. He's a 31-year veteran of the force who was caught on film just dramatically beating a 21-year-old student along the Benjamin Franklin Parkway last Monday. And District Attorney Larry Krasner said this past Friday, after days of calls for action, that basically that he be charged. But Bologna now will face charges of felony aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and possession of an instrument of crime, Krasner said on Friday. And this officer has now turned himself into police. Philadelphia Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw said on Friday that an internal affairs investigation has been opened. Obviously, that's just kind of par for the course. What the police do from time to time when they say, we gotta go after one of our own here, guys, but we're not really sure what's going on, even though everyone's seen the video. But Bologna walked into Lodge 5 of the Fraternal Order of Police on Monday morning, escorted by his lawyer and police union head John McNesby, according to a report from the Inquirer. And dozens of his fellow officers, along with hundreds of people, were out on the street applauding him as he was escorted into court today. So
applauding his arrest or applauding his beating the hell out of people. What was being applauded there?
Applauding him beating the brutal hell out of a college student and saying that was completely justified. So, I mean, Philadelphia has a long history of racist, white working class communities that intrinsically are taught from a young age to support the police and to justify and rationalize the brutality that is foisted upon many communities of color in Philadelphia. And John McNesby and the Fraternal Order of Police in Philadelphia, and to a large extent the Philadelphia political class, are an extension of instrumentally instituting that brutality over a number of decades. So this isn't really a surprise, but obviously Krasner is one of the most progressive DAs in the country right now in terms of police reform and in terms of dealing with criminal justice issues. So it's going to be an interesting case to see what he does in terms of holding the police accountable, while at the same time, the police union is exerting every pressure imaginable, as we kind of outlined before, in the many different ways that they're able to do that on Krasner and on the city infrastructure to allow this officer to get off and to basically codify and legalize the brutality that has been enacted on the peaceful protesters of the city of Philadelphia.
Mm.
Yeah, and Krasner himself was elected on the police reform criminal injustice system reform platform. I mean, and he's recognized across the country as sort of, the new progressive wave of district attorneys that seems to be happening. But Kim, I just wanted to also talk a little bit, if you don't mind, as to the so-called multiracial aspects of the demonstrations and the protests we've been seeing across the country. I don't know why the corporate media just doesn't come out and state clearly that the vast majority of the protesters were white. And of course, there were people of color there too, but the vast majority were white. And the question is, a friend of mine says he didn't know there were so many woke white people in America. But the question is, was this a sincere outpouring of rage on the part, particularly of young white folks? I mean, most of these protesters were young people, college age, even high school age, and they seem to be fearless in the face of the police cordons. But the question that some people are asking is, will they sustain this? Will they then use their collective power of the white community, of white people of conscience, to begin to dismantle the systemic racism and the white supremacist institutions? Will they dismantle them, and will they then militate for sweeping public policy changes? That is left to be seen. And but I do hope that that what started off as a moment in the protest moment against racist policing could probably evolve into a movement with the potential to bring about structural change. We shall see.
Well, speaking of structural change, there has been what has been described as a sweeping piece of legislation introduced into the House of Representatives. It is called the Justice in Policing Act, and it is pretty broad. It talks about banning chokeholds, including what we saw, the knee on the neck of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It would also ban no-knock warrants in drug cases. It would also go on to include inclusivity and anti-bias training for police. Aren't you excited, gang? That doesn't give you a renowned faith in the police.
Here we go again.
They're going to get more training. Think about all the training. How much training? These people got more training than people's dogs. I mean, my goodness. So
how about we take all the money? How about we take all the money and all the training, and let's just ignore the fact that we're already doing that, and to just give the police more money when all the protesters are calling to defund the police.
A training program would be created. This is reported by NBC News. Would be created under the bill that would cover racial bias and duty to intervene, and the measure would require that police officers use deadly force only as a last result and use de-escalation techniques. The measure would also create a federal registry. Shocking that one doesn't already exist for misconduct complaints and disciplinary actions against police officers. This is something that Neil Franklin has been talking about, why there is not a nationwide database of police officers who are terminated either for incompetence or use of force or for murder or for a variety of reasons why people would normally get fired from a job and may or may not be able to regain employment again in that same field. Genevieve, now, I know we're supposed to hold a certain amount of faith in our elected Black officials. I don't, but some people do. When I read that this bill had over 200 Democratic co-sponsors in both the House and the Senate, I said, some of the stuff that they're advocating for, it's not going to make it out of committee. I don't think. But what is your take? What do you think about the congressional effort now to address the issue of over-policing and police brutality and bringing police more accountable?
Right. I mean, my biggest worry is that they're doing it because of the moment. Like, they have the protesters, people are outside, you know, they're saying like, we're not going to vote for you if you don't do this. So they're just reacting to what is going on right now. Are they going to follow through with it like in a month, in 3 weeks? I don't know. They have a habit of, you know, just showing face to say like, okay, I care about this issue. And then like after people, you know, forget about it, the media moves on, it kind of just falls through the cracks and like, oh, that wasn't a problem anymore. So yeah, a big part of me worries that this is just something that's going to happen on paper, and then it doesn't look very good, even if it does pass the House, if it gets to the Senate. So I think that's when people, you know, the voters will have to hold, you know, the politicians accountable. That's kind of our job as voters, to say, look, you promised this thing, so we're gonna see to it that you make this happen. But yeah.
We got to remember that these politicians are centrists. You know, they are reformists. They're not.
You're being nice by calling them centrist, Don. You're being way nice by calling them centrist, because a lot of these Democrats are Republican.
These are right-wing Democrats. These are right-wing
totally
Democrats.
No, I won't say the majority of the Congressional Black Caucus are right wing. No, I won't characterize them as that. I characterize them as neoliberal centrist politicians. They're not right wing. Per se, but you know, they fall into the same old trap. Reformism is a way to tackle these problems, and it is not. It is not. If you don't address the structural and institutional root causes of police brutality, you're just going to continue to tinker at the edges. Really.
And I'm just going to say real quick, we just have a cottage industry of neoliberal hand-wringing here, and it's just manifested itself in so many different ways. I mean, the legislation that they're putting forward, you know, no chokeholds. I'm like, well, no shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why are we doing no chokeholds? Like, obviously, like that seems like basic common sense if you don't want to kill someone. Like, I mean, you know, this is just ridiculous. I mean, we have people that represent us, and this isn't about the Congressional Black Caucus at all. This is about like Nancy Pelosi and, you know, the Democratic leadership more generally. They show face and they try to obfuscate what they're actually doing and try to get the people who are associated with, you know, the movement, the resistance against Trump, to internalize their, you know, neoliberal version of politics into being. And then they just turn face and then they sell everyone out. I mean, this is what they do. They have a whole industry based upon this, about PRing and putting different information out there to kind of show solidarity. I mean, you had Nancy Pelosi, you know, in Congress just the other day, kneeling with all these other congressional members. I mean, it's just a show of just total PR blitz nonsense that is not based in any tangible systemic change reality. And that's the problem. And I think that's the difference this time, is that they're getting called out on it really quickly, like than they were before. Like, you know, after Freddie Gray and after a lot of the incidents that occurred, you know, back in 2014 and 2015, there was, you know, more of a people agreed with Nancy Pelosi and their take at that time. You're seeing immediately after this is getting laid out that people on the left and more progressive voices out there are coming in and saying that this is obviously not enough and they should have known this from the beginning.
I wanted to put forth a couple of comments from the comments and get the panel's reaction. Bill Vasso says, destroying statues is equivalent to burning books. History should be taught. I mean, I can respond to Bill, but first of all, Bill, yeah, history can be taught, but statues are icons, right? Those are people that we want to hold in reverence, people that we want to remember. Why do we want to hold in reverence someone who was a slave trader? Why do we want to hold someone in reverence who was the leader of the Confederate Army, who tried to, you know, destroy this country by tearing it into two separate entities? I mean, these are not people that we should be keeping statues around. I mean, we can teach the history. The history is right there to be taught. I don't see taking down statues as equivalent to burning books, because no one is erasing these people from the history books. I mean, you go to Germany, there are not statues of Hitler, but y'all know he was there.
There you go. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think it just goes to show like the broader trends and issues within our educational system as a whole. I mean, to say that, this is, equivalent to burning history or something of that nature. I mean, there's a difference between knowing about something that occurred in history and presenting a robust critique about it, and then just idolizing and, pontificating in a glorious fashion about people who were essentially just genocidal maniacs through one lens or another. So, I mean, this is a problem that's not unique to the United States in any way. I mean, if you go to Ukraine today, there's lots of deification and things of that nature of former Nazis, former Nazi collaborators. I mean, this is the same kind of culture that we're dealing with. It's embedded into the educational bedrocks of the society. And it's really hard to remove when people don't have a clear contextualization of what occurred in order for these people to reach, a deified level in society, and a critique of that in a way that presents them for, in the brutal context in which they deserve to be attributed to.
I think it's a false equivalent to try to say, burning books is equal to, pulling down statues. Yeah. I mean, in fact, what we need to do across all of society is to start reading more about the history, the real history of the U.S. empire. The inconvenient truths that in many books that are out there by many scholars for many years who have been, trying to educate the American public as to the real nature of its history. And now is a good time for protesters who are genuinely motivated by outrage at what they have been seeing to begin to educate themselves on the history of the people of the United States, not of the elites, not of the rulers, but of the people of the country.
So the question I asked the viewers earlier was, how are the local media covering some of these protests? And we got some responses. Kel Jones says media in Raleigh, North Carolina was characterizing protests as riots and violent and emphasizing property damage and not showing all of the tear gassing. Yeah, I was reading in the News Observer today out of North Carolina that a lot of protesters said that they were peaceful and yet they were targeted by police with tear gas and provocation. Patricia Palumbo says, I'm in Vermont and local cable is supportive. The governor is also, and he is Republican. Well, I'm glad to hear that, gang. So that is our hour, folks. I think we have held you hostage a little longer than you thought. So I'd like to thank our fantastic panel, co-host of the forthcoming show, Why You Should Give a Fuck, Genevieve. I call her Genevieve because she's Haitian, and I love the way Genevieve just flows out of your mouth. Genevieve Montinar, thank you so much. Don Rojas and Andrew Corkery, all from The Real News. We appreciate y'all stopping by Star Crazy today.
Thank you, Tim. Great.
Thanks so much for having us. Keep the revolution televised.
And streamed and streamed. Listen, guys, we always want to hear from you. We appreciate your emails. We do see them. stircrazy@therealnews.com. We will see you tomorrow here for episode 49 of Stir Crazy. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Y'all take it easy. Have a great rest of your Monday. Bye.